The police station lobby was emptying fast. Chairs scraped back, coats were shrugged on, and the last tired voices called out their goodbyes as officers filed through the glass doors into the frozen Christmas Eve night. Bryce Foster stood at the front desk, signing off on the last stack of paperwork, trying to ignore the ache in his shoulders and the hollow feeling that came with spending another holiday alone. His canine partner, Ember, sat at his feet, calm as always, eyes tracking every movement in the room. The German Shepherd had been his shadow for 3 years now, and Bryce knew her moods better than he knew his own. She was alert but relaxed, her tail occasionally brushing the tile floor. Until she wasn't. Ember's ears snapped forward. Her entire body went rigid. A low growl rumbled deep in her chest, a sound Bryce had only heard a handful of times and never without cause. He looked down at her, then followed her gaze across the lobby. In the corner, near the fake Christmas tree, someone from admin had set up that morning. A small figure sat hunched in an oversized chair. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, dark hair falling in tangles around her face, hands clutched tight in her lap. She'd been there for hours, waiting while the social worker tried and failed to reach anyone who could take her for the night. Bryce had seen her earlier, noticed her because she hadn't cried, hadn't asked for anything, just sat there like she'd learned a long time ago that making noise didn't help. Now she was crying. Soft, hiccuping sobs that she tried to muffle behind her hands. Ember was on her feet before Bryce could react, moving across the lobby with purpose. Not aggressive, but deliberate. She walked straight to the little girl and sat down directly in front of her, blocking her from the rest of the room. The child looked up, startled, her wet eyes going wide. Ember leaned forward and pressed her nose gently against the girl's knee. The crying stopped. The girl's hand moved slowly, tentatively, and touched the soft fur between Ember's ears. Bryce crossed the lobby, his boots echoing in the emptying space. "Hey there," he said quietly, crouching down a few feet away so he wouldn't tower over her. "I'm Officer Foster. This is Ember. She seems to really like you." The girl didn't answer. Her fingers curled into Ember's fur, and the dog didn't move, didn't pull away, just sat there, solid and warm and present. Bryce tried to remember what the intake officer had told him earlier. Found wandering near the Ridgewood Mall. No ID. Said her aunt dropped her off and told her to wait. That was 4 hours ago. The aunt never came back. Child services had been called, but with the holiday everyone was stretched thin. They'd promised someone would come by 8. It was almost 9 now. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Bryce asked. "Ivy." Her voice was barely a whisper. "That's a pretty name. Ivy, we're going to take care of you, okay? Someone's coming to make sure you're safe tonight." Ivy nodded, but she didn't let go of Ember. The dog's eyes flicked up to Bryce, and he saw something there he couldn't quite name. Not just protectiveness. Something sharper. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck prickle. Ember shifted her weight, angling her body even more deliberately between Ivy and the door. The growl started again, low and steady. Bryce straightened up and looked around the lobby. It was nearly empty now. Sergeant Mallory was locking up the back offices. A janitor pushed a cart down the far hallway. The dispatch officer behind the reinforced glass window was gathering her things. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. But Ember's growl didn't stop. Her ears were pinned back now, and her gaze was locked on the glass doors that led outside. Watching. Waiting. "Easy, girl," Bryce murmured. He reached down and rested his hand on her shoulder. Her muscles were coiled tight beneath his palm. Sergeant Mallory walked over, keys jangling from her belt. She was a compact woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that Bryce respected. She glanced at Ember, then at Ivy, then back at Bryce. "Social worker just called." She's stuck out in Parkdale with a case that went sideways. Won't make it here until morning." She sighed and rubbed her temple. "I can stay if you need to head out. I know you've been on since 6. "I'm good," Bryce said automatically. His eyes stayed on Ember. The dog hadn't relaxed. If anything, she'd gotten more tense. Mallory frowned. "What's with your partner?" "I don't know." Bryce crouched down again, this time running his hand along Ember's back, checking for any sign of injury or discomfort. Nothing. She was healthy, alert, and absolutely certain that something was wrong. She won't leave the kid. "Dogs know things," Mallory said quietly. She'd been on the force for 26 years and had worked with more K-9 units than Bryce could count. She didn't dismiss instinct. Ever. Bryce nodded. "Yeah, they do." Mallory took a step closer to Ivy, and Ember's growl deepened. The sergeant stopped immediately, hands raised in a calming gesture. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, Ember. I'm not going to hurt her." She looked at Bryce. "That's unusual. That's putting it lightly." Bryce felt his pulse start to pick up. Ember trusted Mallory. Had worked alongside her dozens of times. There was no reason for this reaction. Unless Ember wasn't reacting to the people in the room. Unless she was reacting to something else. Something none of them could see yet. Ivy's hand tightened in Ember's fur. "Is she mad at me?" the little girl asked, her voice trembling. "No, honey," Bryce said gently. "She's protecting you. She thinks someone might try to hurt you, and she's making sure that doesn't happen." He kept his tone calm, reassuring, even as his mind started racing through possibilities. Who had dropped this kid off? Why hadn't they come back? What had Ivy seen or heard that made Ember react like this? Mallory caught his eye. Her expression had shifted from curious to concerned. "You want me to pull the intake report?" "Yeah. And the security footage from the mall. I want to see who brought her in." Bryce straightened up, his hand still resting on Ember's back. The dog's muscles hadn't relaxed even a fraction. She was locked in, ready to move, ready to fight if she had to. He'd seen her take down suspects twice her size without hesitation, but he'd never seen her act like this with a child, never seen her refuse to leave someone's side. The station was quiet now. Almost everyone had gone home. The lights in the back hallways were dimming on automatic timers. Outside, snow had started to fall, clinging to the glass doors and turning the parking lot into a blurred wash of white and shadow. It should have felt peaceful, safe. But Bryce's instincts were screaming now, matching Ember's tension beat for beat. Something was wrong. Something was coming. And his partner knew it before anyone else did. Mallory walked briskly back toward her office, already pulling out her phone. Bryce knelt down next to Ivy again, close enough now that he could see the exhaustion in her small face, the way her coat was too thin for the weather, the scuff marks on her shoes. Ember pressed closer to her, a solid wall of fur and muscle and unwavering loyalty. The girl leaned into the dog, and for a moment, Bryce saw her shoulders relax just a little. "You're safe here, Ivy," he said quietly. "I promise." But even as he said it, Ember's growl rolled through the empty lobby like distant thunder, and Bryce knew that whatever danger she sensed was already closer than any of them realized. Bryce stayed close to Ivy while Mallory disappeared into the back offices, the click of her boots fading down the dimmed hallway. The station felt bigger in the quiet, emptier. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead became noticeable, a low buzz that filled the spaces where voices and movement used to be. Ember hadn't shifted position. Her body was still angled protectively in front of the little girl, her dark eyes scanning the glass doors, the shadows beyond them, the parking lot where snow fell in thick, lazy spirals. Bryce pulled a chair over and sat down, keeping himself at Ivy's level. He wanted her to feel safe, to know he wasn't going anywhere, but he also needed answers. Gently, carefully. Kids this age scared easily, and if she shut down now, he might not get another chance. "Ivy," he said softly, "can you tell me about your aunt? The one who brought you to the mall?" The girl's fingers tightened in Ember's fur. She didn't look up. "She's not really my aunt," Ivy whispered. "That's just what she told me to say." Bryce felt his chest tighten. He kept his voice calm even. "Okay. That's okay. What's her real name?" Ivy shook her head. "I don't know. She said I should call her Aunt Diane, but I heard someone else call her something different on the phone. I don't remember what." "How long have you been with her?" "I don't know." Ivy's voice cracked a little. "A few days, maybe. It's hard to remember. We stayed in different places. Hotels, I think. She kept saying we were going on an adventure, that my mom asked her to take care of me for a little while." Bryce's pulse quickened. "Where's your mom now, sweetheart?" "I don't know." A tear slipped down Ivy's cheek. "I want to go home. I want my mom." Ember leaned in closer, pressing her shoulder against the girl's legs, and Ivy buried her face in the dog's neck. Bryce gave her a moment, letting the silence settle. His mind was already racing ahead, piecing together fragments that didn't fit. A woman who wasn't really an aunt. Multiple hotels. A child who'd been moved around for days, and then left in a public place with instructions to wait. It didn't feel like neglect. It felt like something worse. Something planned. He pulled out his phone and texted Mallory, "Need that footage ASAP. And run a missing child search for Ivy, first name only, age 6, last few days." The reply came back almost immediately. "Already on it. Footage is loading now. Come back when you can." Bryce stood slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "Ivy, I need to go check on something with Sergeant Mallory. But Ember's gonna stay right here with you, okay? She won't leave." Ivy looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Promise?" "I promise." He looked down at Ember and gave her the command to stay. The dog's ears flicked back in acknowledgement, but she didn't take her eyes off the doors. Bryce felt the weight of that stare, the intensity of it. Ember was watching for someone, waiting for someone, and that certainty, that bone-deep awareness, made his stomach twist. He crossed the lobby quickly and headed down the back hallway toward Mallory's office. The fluorescent lights flickered once as he passed beneath them, casting his shadow long and distorted against the pale green walls. The building was old, outdated, and the holiday silence made every sound sharper. The hum of the vending machine in the break room, the distant crackle of the dispatch radio, the faint scrape of the janitor's cart somewhere on the second floor. Mallory's office door was open. She was seated at her desk, eyes locked on her computer screen, one hand working the mouse, while the other held her phone to her ear. She glanced up when Bryce stepped inside and gestured for him to close the door behind him. He did. The click of the latch felt louder than it should have. "Yeah, I'm looking at it now," Mallory said into the phone. "Send me everything you've got. I'll wait." She put the call on speaker and set the phone down on the desk. "That's County. They're pulling records." Bryce moved around the desk to stand beside her, his eyes on the screen. The security footage from Ridgewood Mall was paused on a frame showing the main entrance. Timestamp marked 3:47 p.m. Mallory clicked play. The image jerked into motion, shoppers moving in and out, families with bags, a few teenagers loitering near the vending machines. Then, a woman appeared in the frame. Thin. Mid-30s maybe. Dark coat, oversized sunglasses even though it was overcast outside. She was holding Ivy's hand. The little girl looked small next to her, her head down, shoulders hunched. "There," Bryce said, pointing. "That's her." Mallory nodded and let the footage play. The woman led Ivy to a bench near the entrance and crouched down, speaking to her. Ivy nodded. The woman handed her a small backpack, bright pink with a cartoon character on the front. Then she stood, glanced around the mall entrance, and walked away. Ivy sat down on the bench, clutching the backpack in her lap. She didn't move, didn't get up, just sat there like she'd been told to. She waits there for almost an hour before security notices her, Mallory said quietly. She fast-forwarded the footage. By the time they approach her, the woman's long gone. No sign of her leaving through the main entrance. She must have used one of the side exits. Smart, Bryce muttered. She knew where the cameras were. Yeah. Mallory rewound the footage and zoomed in on the woman's face as she turned slightly toward the camera. The image was grainy, pixelated, but Bryce could make out enough. Sharp features. No distinguishing marks he could see. The sunglasses hid most of her expression. She looked calm, controlled. Not frantic or worried. Not like someone who'd lost a child or made a mistake. She looked like someone following a plan. The phone on the desk crackled. "Mallory, you there?" The voice belonged to Deputy Chen from County Dispatch. "Yeah, go ahead." "Got a hit on your search. Missing child report filed 3 days ago out of Fairmont, about 200 miles north of you. 6-year-old girl named Ivy Callahan. Mother reported her missing after the girl's babysitter claimed she'd been picked up early by a family friend. No family friend ever existed. Amber Alert was issued but canceled after 48 hours when the trail went cold." Bryce felt his blood go cold. Canceled? Standard procedure when there's no leads and no sightings. Doesn't mean they stopped looking. Just means they moved it to a different priority level. "I'm sending you the case file now." Mallory's computer pinged. She opened the file and scrolled through it quickly. Photos of Ivy, a picture of her mother, a young woman with the same dark hair, the same small build, a statement from the babysitter, tearful and terrified. Witness descriptions of a woman matching the one in the mall footage who'd been seen near the babysitter's house the day Ivy disappeared. "This is organized," Mallory said, her voice tight. "This isn't some custody dispute or a confused relative. Someone took this kid with a plan." Bryce's hands balled into fists. "And then left her at a police station." Mallory looked up at him, her expression grim. "Why would they do that?" "I don't know." But Bryce's mind was already turning over possibilities, none of them good. You didn't take a child across state lines, move her through multiple locations, and then drop her off at a police station unless you were confident you could get her back. Unless you had a reason to believe no one would stop you. Unless... "The backpack," Bryce said suddenly. "She gave Ivy a backpack. I need to see it." Mallory was already on her feet. They moved quickly back down the hallway, their boots echoing in unison. The lobby came into view. The Christmas tree with its blinking lights, the empty chairs, the glass doors streaked with snow. Ivy was still sitting where Bryce had left her, her arms wrapped around Ember's neck. The dog's ears swiveled toward them as they approached, but she didn't move, didn't relax. Her body was still locked in that protective stance, her gaze fixed on the doors. Bryce knelt down beside Ivy again, forcing his voice to stay gentle. "Ivy, sweetheart, can I see your backpack for a second?" The girl hesitated, then slowly reached down and picked it up from the floor. She handed it to him, her small fingers reluctant to let go. Bryce took it carefully and set it on the chair beside him. It was light. Too light for a kid who'd been traveling for days. He unzipped it slowly and looked inside. A coloring book. A box of crayons. A stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. Nothing else. No clothes, no snacks, no water bottle. Nothing a caregiver would pack. Mallory leaned in, her eyes scanning the contents. "That's it." "Yeah." Bryce turned the backpack over in his hands, feeling along the seams, the pockets, the straps. His fingers caught on something near the bottom, a slight bump beneath the fabric lining. He pressed down on it. hard, small, deliberately hidden. His heart started to hammer in his chest. He looked up at Mallory. "Get me a knife." She pulled a small folding blade from her belt and handed it over without a word. Bryce carefully sliced through the stitching along the inside lining of the backpack and peeled it back. A small black object fell into his palm. Circular, no bigger than a quarter. A blinking red light pulsed once, then went dark. Mallory's breath hissed through her teeth. "That's a tracker." Bryce stared down at it. The weight of it far heavier than it should have been. Someone had sewn it into Ivy's backpack. Someone wanted to know exactly where she was, at all times. And if they'd left her here, if they'd walked away knowing the police would take her in. "They're planning to come back," he said quietly. Ember's growl split the silence, low and sharp and unmistakable. Bryce's head snapped up. The dog was on her feet now, every muscle coiled tight, her lips pulled back just enough to show teeth. Her eyes were locked on the glass doors, on the parking lot beyond, on the figure moving slowly through the falling snow toward the entrance. A woman in a dark coat. Bryce's hand moved to his sidearm on instinct, his fingers brushing the grip as his eyes tracked the figure approaching through the snow. The woman moved with deliberate calm, her pace unhurried, her dark coat blending into the storm beyond the glass. She was maybe 30 feet from the entrance now, 25. Her face was still obscured by the collar of her coat and the angle of her approach, but something about her posture, the confidence in her stride, told him this wasn't a coincidence. Mallory was already moving, her hand on her radio. "All units, we have a potential situation at the main entrance. I need backup to the station immediately." Her voice was steady, professional, but Bryce caught the edge of tension beneath it. She glanced at him. "Get Ivy out of sight. Now." Bryce didn't hesitate. He turned to the little girl, keeping his voice as calm as he could manage. "Ivy, sweetheart, we're gonna play a game, okay? I need you to come with me and Ember to a different room, somewhere safer. Can you do that?" Ivy's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded. She trusted him. More than that, she trusted Ember. The dog was already moving, positioning herself between Ivy and the doors, her body a living shield. Bryce scooped the backpack off the chair, stuffed the tracker into his pocket, and reached out his hand. Ivy took it without hesitation, her small fingers cold and trembling in his palm. They moved quickly across the lobby toward the back hallway, Ember leading the way with her head low and her ears pinned back. Behind them, Bryce heard the soft pneumatic hiss of the front doors beginning to slide open. He didn't look back, didn't stop. His focus was on getting Ivy somewhere secure, somewhere the woman couldn't reach her, even if she made it past the front desk. Mallory's voice cut through the lobby, sharp and commanding. "Ma'am, the station is closed for the evening. Can I help you with something?" Bryce reached the hallway and pulled Ivy around the corner, out of sight. Ember pressed close to the girl's side, her body tense but controlled. Bryce crouched down, putting himself at Ivy's level again. "Listen to me, honey. You're going to stay in this room with Ember, and I'm going to lock the door. No one can get in except me or Sergeant Mallory, okay? You're safe." "Is she here?" Ivy's voice was barely a whisper. "The lady who left me?" "I don't know yet." Bryce forced himself to meet her eyes, to keep his expression calm even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "But if she is, we're not going to let her take you, I promise." He opened the door to the small interview room 3 doors down, windowless, reinforced lock, a table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. It wasn't comfortable, but it was secure. He guided Ivy inside, and Ember followed immediately, taking up position near the door. The dog's eyes stayed locked on Bryce, waiting for the command. He pointed to Ivy. "Guard." Ember's posture shifted. She moved closer to the girl, her body language unmistakable. Nothing was getting past her. Nothing. Bryce felt a flicker of relief cut through the adrenaline flooding his system. Whatever happened out there, Ivy had the best protection he could give her. He stepped back into the hallway and locked the door from the outside, pocketing the key. Then he moved quickly back toward the lobby, his hand resting on his sidearm, his mind running through scenarios. If this woman was bold enough to walk into a police station on Christmas Eve, she either had leverage he didn't know about yet, or she was desperate. Either option made her dangerous. He reached the edge of the hallway and peered around the corner into the lobby. The woman was standing just inside the entrance, snow melting off her coat and pooling on the tile beneath her boots. She'd lowered her hood now, revealing sharp features, pale skin, and cold eyes that swept the room with practiced efficiency. She looked exactly like the woman from the mall footage. Same build, same controlled demeanor. Mallory stood between her and the back hallway, one hand resting casually on her belt near her radio, the other held loosely at her side. "I'm here to pick up my niece," the woman said. Her voice was smooth, polite, but there was an edge to it that set Bryce's teeth on edge. "I was told she was brought here earlier this evening. Her name is Ivy." Mallory didn't move. "And you are?" "Diane Mercer. I'm her aunt, legal guardian while her mother is indisposed." The woman reached into her coat pocket, and Bryce's hand tightened on his weapon. She pulled out a folded stack of papers and held them out. "I have the documents right here. Temporary custody agreement, signed and notarized. There was a miscommunication earlier. I had an emergency and couldn't get back to the mall in time. I've been looking for her all evening." Mallory took the papers but didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed locked on the woman. "Funny, because we've been looking for Ivy too, for about 3 days now, ever since she was reported missing out of Fairmont." The woman's expression didn't change, not even a flicker. "That was a misunderstanding. Her mother has a history of overreacting. The custody situation is complicated. But everything is in order now. I'm here to take Ivy home." "Home where?" Mallory's voice was flat, giving nothing away. "That's really none of your concern, officer." The woman's tone sharpened just slightly. "I have legal documentation. You're required to release her into my custody." Bryce stepped out from the hallway, making himself visible. The woman's eyes snapped to him immediately, and he saw something flicker there. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. She hadn't expected anyone else to still be here. "Those documents," Bryce said evenly, "we're gonna need to verify them. That takes time, especially on a holiday." The woman's jaw tightened. "I don't have time. I need to take Ivy and leave. Now. That's not how this works." Mallory's voice was steel. "You can wait while we verify your identity and your paperwork, or you can leave and come back during regular business hours with a lawyer. Your choice." The woman stared at her for a long moment, and Bryce could see the wheels turning behind those cold eyes. She was weighing options, calculating risks, deciding how far she could push before the situation turned against her. Finally, she smiled, thin, tight, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Of course. I understand, but I'd like to see her, just to make sure she's all right. Surely you can allow that." "She's resting," Bryce said, "and she's safe. That's all you need to know right now." The woman took a step forward. Mallory's hand moved fractionally closer to her sidearm. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay where you are. I'm not leaving without my niece." The politeness was gone now, stripped away to reveal something harder beneath. "You have no legal right to keep her from me." "Actually," Mallory said quietly, "we do. She's a minor who was found abandoned in a public place with no identification and no verifiable guardian. Until we can confirm your identity and your legal relationship to her, she stays in protective custody." She gestured toward the door. "You're welcome to wait outside. We'll call you when we're ready." The woman didn't move. Her eyes flicked from Mallory to Bryce, then toward the back hallway where Ivy had disappeared. Bryce saw the shift in her expression the moment she realized they knew. That they'd found something. That this wasn't going to be as simple as walking in with forged papers and walking out with a child. Her hand moved toward her pocket again, Bryce's weapon cleared his holster before she'd finished the motion. "Hands where I can see them, now." The woman froze. Slowly, deliberately, she raised both hands, palms out. "I was just reaching for my phone. Leave it where it is." Mallory was already moving, circling around to the woman's side. "Turn around, hands behind your back. You're making a mistake." The woman's voice was low, dangerous. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Then enlighten us," Bryce said. His weapon stayed trained on her center mass, steady and unwavering. "Start with your real name." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer. Mallory pulled the cuffs from her belt and secured them around the woman's wrists with practiced efficiency, then patted her down quickly. She pulled out a phone, a wallet with 3 different IDs inside, and a folded piece of paper covered in handwritten notes. Mallory scanned it quickly, her expression darkening. "Bryce," she said quietly, "you need to see this." He moved closer, keeping his weapon ready, and glanced down at the paper in Mallory's hand. It was a list: names, dates, locations, and at the bottom, circled in red ink, Ivy Callahan, Ridgewood Station, 9 p.m. Retrieve. His stomach turned over. This wasn't just about one child. This was part of something bigger, something organized, and they just walked straight into the middle of it. Bryce stared down at the list in Mallory's hand, his mind racing through the implications of every word, every name, every carefully noted time and place. The woman in cuffs stood silent now, her expression locked down tight, giving them nothing. But the paper told a story she couldn't hide. This wasn't improvised. This wasn't desperation. This was methodical, clinical, a schedule of pickups and deliveries, and Ivy was just one line item in a much longer operation. Mallory's voice was low and controlled when she spoke. "We need to lock this place down. Now." She pulled her radio and keyed it. "Dispatch. This is Sergeant Mallory at Ridgewood Station. I need all available units to my location immediately. We have a suspect in custody related to an active child trafficking investigation. I repeat, child trafficking. Full perimeter lockdown. No one in or out without clearance." The radio crackled back almost instantly. "Copy that, Sergeant. Units are en route. ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Bryce's pulse hammered in his ears. 4 minutes felt like a lifetime when you were standing in the middle of something this big. He holstered his weapon but kept his hand near it, his eyes never leaving the woman in cuffs. She hadn't moved, hadn't protested. Just stood there with that cold, calculating stillness that made his skin crawl. She was waiting for something. Or someone. Mallory grabbed the woman by the arm and guided her toward one of the metal chairs near the front desk. "Sit. Don't move. Don't speak." The woman complied without a word, lowering herself into the chair with eerie calm. Mallory secured her to the chair with a second set of cuffs looped through the armrest, then stepped back and turned to Bryce. "I'm calling the feds. This is way beyond our jurisdiction now." Bryce nodded. His thoughts were already back down the hallway with Ivy, locked in that small room with Ember standing guard. The girl had been used, moved around like cargo, tagged with a tracking device so they could monitor her every step. And when they'd decided it was time to retrieve her, they'd sent someone straight into a police station. Confident, prepared, armed with forged documents and a cover story that might have worked if Ember hadn't sensed the danger first. His dog had known. Before any of them had put the pieces together, Ember had known. Mallory was already on her phone, speaking in clipped, urgent tones to someone at the FBI field office 2 counties over. Bryce moved back toward the hallway, his boots echoing in the too quiet lobby. He needed to check on Ivy. Needed to see her face, hear her voice, make sure she was still okay. He reached the interview room door and unlocked it quickly, pushing it open just enough to look inside. Ember was exactly where he'd left her, positioned between the door and the small figure curled up in the chair against the back wall. The dog's ears swiveled toward him, but she didn't move from her post. Ivy looked up, her face pale and streaked with tears she'd tried to wipe away. Her hands were still tangled in the stuffed rabbit from her backpack, clutching it like a lifeline. "Is she gone?" Ivy's voice was so small it barely reached him. Bryce stepped inside and closed the door behind him, crouching down so he was at her level again. "She's not going anywhere. We have her. She can't hurt you. She said she was taking me somewhere safe." Ivy's voice cracked. "She said my mom asked her to. But she was lying, wasn't she?" "Yeah, sweetheart, she was lying." Bryce's chest tightened. He'd worked cases like this before. Kids caught in the middle of things they didn't understand, used by people who saw them as nothing more than commodities. But it never got easier, never stopped making him feel sick. "Your mom has been looking for you. She never stopped. And we're gonna make sure you get back to her, I promise." Ivy nodded, fresh tears spilling over. Ember moved closer, pressing her shoulder against the girl's legs, and Ivy leaned into the contact. Bryce watched the tension in her small frame ease just a fraction, the way her breathing slowed when she felt the dog's warmth. Ember had given her something he couldn't. A sense of safety that didn't require words or explanations. Just presence. Just loyalty. He reached out and rested his hand gently on Ivy's shoulder. "You're really brave, you know that? You did everything right. You waited. You trusted us. And that helped us find the people who took you." "Are there more?" Ivy asked quietly. "More kids like me?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He didn't want to lie to her. Didn't want to sugarcoat the truth. But she was 6 years old, and she'd already been through more than any child should ever have to endure. "We're going to find out," he said carefully. "And we're going to help them, just like we helped you." Ivy nodded again, her fingers tightening around the stuffed rabbit. Bryce stayed there for another moment, just watching her, making sure she felt safe before he left again. Then he stood slowly and moved back to the door. "Ember, stay." The dog's ears flicked in acknowledgement. She wasn't going anywhere. Bryce stepped back into the hallway and locked the door behind him. The sound of sirens was growing louder now, cutting through the muffled quiet of the storm outside. Backup was arriving. The perimeter was tightening. He moved quickly back toward the lobby, his mind already shifting into operational mode. They had the woman in custody, but the list in Mallory's hand suggested this was just one piece of a much larger network. There would be others. People who coordinated the pickups. People who transported the kids. People who... He didn't let himself finish that thought. When he reached the lobby, 2 patrol units were already pulling into the parking lot, their lights flashing red and blue across the snow-covered pavement. Mallory was still on the phone, pacing near the front desk, her voice low and intense. The woman in cuffs hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. Bryce walked over to Mallory and waited until she lowered the phone. "Feds? On their way. They're mobilizing a task force. They want everything we have, the footage, the list, the tracker, all of it." She glanced toward the woman in the chair. "They also want her isolated and secured until they can get a team here to handle the interrogation. This isn't just local anymore. They think this network spans at least 3 states. Bryce felt the weight of that settle over him. 3 states. Dozens of kids, maybe more. And Ivy had been one of the lucky ones. Dropped off in a place where someone noticed, where someone cared enough to dig deeper. How many others hadn't been that lucky? The front doors slid open, and Officers Renwick and Tan stepped inside, shaking snow from their coats. Renwick was a veteran with 20 years on the force, solid and unshakable. Tan was younger, sharper, with a reputation for being thorough. Both of them looked around the lobby, taking in the scene. The woman in cuffs, Mallory's tight expression, Bryce's stance near the hallway. "What do you need?" Renwick asked. Mallory didn't waste time. "Perimeter sweep. I want eyes on every entrance and exit. No one gets in or out without clearance. Tan, I need you to pull every piece of footage we have from the last 6 hours. Mall cameras, street cameras, anything that shows this woman's movements before she got here. Bryce, you're with me. We need to catalog everything she had on her before the feds arrive." Bryce nodded. The adrenaline was still pumping through his system, sharpening his focus, keeping him steady. He moved over to the front desk where Mallory had laid out the woman's belongings, the 3 IDs, the phone, the list, and a set of car keys. He pulled on a pair of gloves and picked up the first ID, Sarah Denton, Oregon driver's license. Looked real enough at first glance, but the edges were too clean, the hologram slightly off. Fake. The second ID was for a Linda Hargrave out of Nevada. Same woman, different name, same telltale signs of forgery. The third was a Virginia license under the name Diane Mercer, the name she'd given when she walked in. Bryce set them down carefully and picked up the phone. It was locked, password protected, but the screen showed 3 missed calls from a contact labeled only as R. Mallory leaned over his shoulder. "We'll need a warrant to unlock it," she said, "but the feds can fast-track that." Bryce set the phone down and picked up the list again, reading through it more carefully this time. The names meant nothing to him yet, but the locations did. Ridgewood, Fairmont, Clarksville, Belmont. All small towns within a few hours' drive of each other. All places where a kid could disappear without making national headlines. The dates ranged over the past 2 months, a steady, methodical schedule of pickups and drops. And next to Ivy's name, in addition to the time and location, there was a second notation. High priority. Retrieve before 2200. No delays. High priority. Why? What made Ivy different from the others on the list? Bryce's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from County Dispatch. Ivy's mother en route. ETA 90 minutes. What's to speak to whoever found her daughter? He showed the message to Mallory. She exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. Good. That's good. At least we can give her that. Bryce nodded, but his thoughts were still circling back to the woman in the chair. She hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't demanded to make a call, hadn't done any of the things most suspects did when they realized they were caught. She was just waiting. And that scared him more than anything else. Because people who waited like that, they weren't afraid. They believed someone was coming for them. He turned back to Mallory. We need to move her. Now. Somewhere more secure than this lobby. Mallory met his eyes and nodded. She understood. The station was old, understaffed, and on a holiday night, it was vulnerable. If this network was as organized as the list suggested, they wouldn't just abandon one of their own. They'd come for her. And when they did, Bryce wanted to make damn sure Ivy was as far from the crossfire as possible. Renwick, Mallory called out, get her into holding. Separate cell, no contact with anyone. Tan, I want that footage in the next 10 minutes. The officers moved immediately. Renwick approached the woman and unlocked the cuffs from the chair, keeping a firm grip on her arm. She stood without resistance, her expression still maddeningly blank. As Renwick led her toward the back hallway, she turned her head just slightly and looked directly at Bryce. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and then she was gone. Bryce stood there for a long moment, staring after her, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. Ember's growl echoed in his memory, that low, bone-deep warning that something was wrong. His dog had known. And now, standing in the empty lobby with the sirens still wailing outside and the snow falling thick against the glass, Bryce knew it too. This wasn't over yet. Bryce moved back down the hallway toward the interview room, his boots echoing in the narrow corridor. The adrenaline was still there, still sharp, but it had shifted into something colder now. Focused. They had the woman in custody, evidence secured, backup on site. The immediate threat was contained. But contained didn't mean eliminated. Not yet. He unlocked the interview room door and stepped inside. Ember's head lifted immediately, her dark eyes locking onto his. She was still in position, still guarding Ivy with the same unwavering intensity she'd shown from the beginning. The little girl was curled up in the chair now, her arms wrapped around the stuffed rabbit, her eyes red but dry. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep, tired that came from fear finally releasing its grip. "Hey, sweetheart," Bryce said softly, crouching down beside her. "I have some really good news. Your mom is on her way here. She's been looking for you, and she'll be here soon." Ivy's eyes went wide. "My real mom?" "Your real mom, I promise." He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "She's going to be so happy to see you." A trembling smile broke across Ivy's face, the first real smile Bryce had seen from her all night. Fresh tears spilled over, but this time they weren't from fear. They were relief. Hope. The kind of tears that came when something impossibly heavy finally lifted. Ember moved closer, pressing her head against Ivy's knee, and the girl wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, burying her face in the thick fur. Bryce felt his chest tighten. He'd been doing this job for almost 8 years now, and moments like this, moments where he got to tell a scared kid that they were going home, those were the ones that made all the rest of it bearable. He stayed with Ivy for a few more minutes, just sitting quietly while she held on to Ember and let herself believe it was real. Then Mallory appeared in the doorway, her expression still tight but softer now. She looked at Ivy and managed a small smile. "Your mom's going to be here in about an hour, honey. Until then, how about we get you something to eat? I think there's some hot chocolate in the break room." Ivy nodded, still clutching the rabbit. Mallory held out her hand, and the girl took it slowly, standing up on shaky legs. Ember stayed right beside her, a solid presence, and together they walked out into the hallway. Bryce followed, keeping a few steps behind, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The station felt different now. Quieter, maybe, but also heavier. The weight of what they'd uncovered hung in the air like smoke. Mallory led Ivy toward the break room, and Bryce veered off toward the holding area. He wanted to see the woman one more time, to look her in the eye now that she was locked behind reinforced steel and tempered glass. Maybe she'd talk. Maybe she wouldn't. But he needed to know who she was working for. Needed to understand how deep this went. The holding cells were in the basement level, accessed through a reinforced door at the end of the main hallway. Bryce swiped his keycard and stepped through, descending the concrete stairs into the dimly lit corridor below. The air was cooler down here, the walls bare cinder block painted institutional gray. Renwick was standing outside the woman's cell, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He glanced up when Bryce approached. She hasn't said a word, just sits there staring at the wall. Bryce stopped in front of the cell and looked through the reinforced glass window. The woman was sitting on the metal bench, bolted to the far wall, her hands cuffed in front of her now, her posture eerily relaxed. She didn't look up when his shadow fell across the window, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. "Open it," Bryce said quietly. Renwick hesitated, then nodded and unlocked the door. The electronic bolt disengaged with a heavy clunk, and Bryce stepped inside. The woman's eyes flicked toward him, just for a second, then returned to the wall. Bryce stayed near the door, keeping his distance, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. "You made a mistake tonight," he said. His voice was calm even. "You walked into a police station thinking you could just take that little girl and disappear. But you couldn't. And now you're here." The woman didn't respond. "So here's what's going to happen," Bryce continued. "The FBI is on their way. They're going to tear apart your entire operation. Everyone on that list you were carrying. Every location, every contact. They're going to find them all. And when they do, the people you're working for are going to realize you're a liability." That got a reaction. Just a flicker. A tightening around her eyes. A slight shift in her posture. But it was there. "You're not getting out of this," Bryce said. "But you can help yourself. You can tell us who's running this network. Where the other kids are. How many people are involved. You do that, and maybe you get a deal that doesn't end with you spending the rest of your life in a federal prison." The woman turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time. Her expression was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of remorse. "You think you stopped something tonight?" she said quietly. Her voice was flat, almost clinical. "You didn't. You delayed it. That's all. There are always more. Always another pickup. Another delivery. You can't save them all." Bryce felt anger flare hot in his chest, but he kept it locked down, kept his voice steady. "Maybe not. But I saved one tonight. And that's enough." The woman's lips curved into that same thin, humorless smile. For now, Bryce held her gaze for another long moment, then turned and walked out of the cell. Renwick locked the door behind him, and the heavy bolt slid back into place with a finality that felt almost satisfying. Almost. He climbed back up the stairs and returned to the main level, his thoughts churning. The woman was right about one thing. This was bigger than one arrest, bigger than one rescue. But she was wrong about the rest. They could stop it. They could dismantle the network piece by piece, find the kids who are still out there, bring the people responsible to justice. It would take time, resources, coordination across jurisdictions. But it could be done. And it started here, tonight, with Ivy. By the time Bryce reached the break room, Ivy was sitting at the small table with a steaming mug of hot chocolate in front of her. Ember was lying at her feet, chin resting on her paws, eyes half closed but still alert. Mallory was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching the girl with an expression that was equal parts relief and exhaustion. "Feds just confirmed," Mallory said quietly when Bryce walked in. "They're sending a full task force, should be here within the hour. They want statements from everyone, full access to all evidence, and they're coordinating with county to set up a joint command center." Bryce nodded. It was the right move. The only move. This was too big for a small-town station to handle alone. "What about the mother? She'll be here before they arrive. I told dispatch to bring her straight through when she gets here. No delays." Mallory paused, then added, "Chen said she's been calling every hour since Ivy disappeared. Never stopped. Never gave up." Bryce felt something loosen in his chest. That was what this was all about. The people who didn't give up. The ones who kept searching, kept hoping, kept believing their kid was out there somewhere and could still be brought home. Ivy looked up at him from across the table, her small hands wrapped around the mug. "Will Ember stay with me until my mom gets here?" "Yeah," Bryce said. "She'll stay." He glanced down at his partner, and Ember's tail thumped once against the floor. She understood. She'd always understood. The next hour passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Officers came and went, securing the perimeter, cataloging evidence, preparing statements. The feds arrived. Sharp-eyed agents in dark suits who moved through the station with practiced efficiency, taking control of the scene with calm authority. And through it all, Ember stayed with Ivy, guarding her, protecting her, just like she'd known to do from the very beginning. Then the front doors slid open one more time, and Bryce heard a sound he'd been waiting for. The rushed, desperate footsteps of someone who'd been running on hope alone for far too long. A woman burst into the lobby, her dark hair wild, her coat halfway off her shoulders, her eyes scanning the room with frantic urgency. She looked exactly like the photo in the missing persons report. The same delicate features, the same small build, but the exhaustion etched into her face told a story no photograph could capture. 3 days of searching, 3 days of not knowing, 3 days of imagining the worst. Mallory stepped forward immediately, her voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Callahan?" The woman's eyes snapped to her, desperate and pleading. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" "She's safe. She's here." Mallory gestured toward the break room. "She's been waiting for you." Mrs. Callahan's knees nearly buckled. One of the federal agents steadied her, but she pushed forward anyway, moving toward the break room like nothing else in the world mattered. Bryce stepped aside as she reached the doorway, and he watched as her eyes found Ivy sitting at the table with the half-empty mug of hot chocolate in front of her. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stared at each other across the small room, mother and daughter, separated by 3 days and 200 miles, and a nightmare neither of them should have ever had to endure. Then Ivy whispered, "Mommy?" Mrs. Callahan crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms with a sob that broke something open in the air. Ivy clung to her, her small hands fisting in her mother's coat, her face buried against her shoulder. They held each other like that for a long time, rocking slightly, crying together, the kind of reunion that didn't need words because nothing could possibly be enough. Ember moved back slightly, giving them space, but her eyes never left Ivy. Her tail wagged slowly, a steady rhythm that seemed almost like approval, like she understood that her job was done now, that this was what she'd been protecting all along. Bryce felt his throat tighten. He'd seen reunions before, plenty of them, but this one hit different. Maybe because of how close they'd come to losing her. Maybe because of how easily it could have gone the other way. Or maybe it was just the look on that little girl's face, the pure, unfiltered relief of being safe again. Mrs. Callahan pulled back just enough to look at her daughter, her hands framing Ivy's face, her thumbs wiping away tears. "I never stopped looking for you, not for 1 second. I knew you were out there. I knew I'd find you." "The lady said you didn't want me anymore," Ivy whispered, her voice breaking. "She said you gave me away." "No. No, baby, never." Mrs. Callahan's voice was fierce now, fierce and broken at the same time. "I would never give you away. You're my whole world. I love you more than anything." Ivy nodded, fresh tears spilling over, and Mrs. Callahan pulled her close again, holding her like she'd never let go. One of the federal agents stepped into the doorway, giving them a respectful moment before speaking quietly. "Mrs. Callahan, I'm Agent Reyes with the FBI. We're going to need to ask Ivy some questions when she's ready. But there's no rush. Take all the time you need." Mrs. Callahan looked up, her face streaked with tears, and nodded. Thank you for finding her. Thank you for keeping her safe." Agent Reyes glanced at Bryce, then at Ember. "Officer Foster and his K-9 partner are the ones who figured it out. They're the reason your daughter is still here." Mrs. Callahan turned toward Bryce, and he saw the gratitude in her eyes, raw and overwhelming and impossible to put into words. She stood slowly, one arm still around Ivy, and crossed the room to him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice shaking. I don't even know where to start. Bryce shook his head. You don't need to thank me. I was just doing my job. It was more than that. Mrs. Callahan looked down at Ember, who was sitting calmly at Bryce's side now, her ears perked forward, her gaze steady. She knew, didn't she? Your dog. She knew something was wrong. Yeah, Bryce said quietly. She knew. Mrs. Callahan crouched down slowly, hesitating for just a moment before reaching out to rest her hand on Ember's head. The dog leaned into the touch, her tail wagging gently, and Mrs. Callahan's shoulders shook with another quiet sob. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for protecting my baby. Ember's tail wagged a little faster, and Bryce felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest, the kind that came from knowing his partner had done exactly what she was trained to do, but also something more, something that couldn't be trained, something that was just instinct and loyalty and the bond they'd built over years of working side by side. Agent Reyes gave them a few more minutes, then gently guided Mrs. Callahan and Ivy toward one of the private offices where they could talk in peace. Ivy glanced back over her shoulder as they walked away, her eyes finding Ember one last time, and the dog's ears swiveled forward in acknowledgement. The lobby felt quieter after they left. The federal agents were still moving through the station, coordinating with Mallory, reviewing footage, preparing to transport the woman in custody to a secure facility where she'd face federal charges. The perimeter was still locked down. The snow was still falling outside, thick and relentless. But the urgency was gone now. The immediate danger had passed. Bryce walked slowly back toward the front desk, Ember padding along beside him. Mallory was standing near the Christmas tree, arms crossed, staring at the blinking lights with an expression Bryce couldn't quite read. She looked tired, relieved, and maybe a little bit shaken. "Hell of a night," she said without looking at him. "Yeah?" Bryce stopped beside her, his eyes following hers to the tree. "Hell of a night. You think the feds will be able to shut it down? The whole network? I think they'll try. And I think they'll get a lot of them." He paused, then added quietly, "But there will always be more. That's the part that keeps me up at night." Mallory nodded slowly. "So we just keep doing this. Keep catching the ones we can. Keep saving the kids we can." "Yeah?" Bryce said. "That's all we can do." They stood there in silence for a long moment, watching the lights blink on and off in their slow, steady rhythm. Somewhere in the back of the station, a phone rang. Someone laughed. The storm outside continued its relentless assault on the windows, and Ember sat quietly at Bryce's side, her head tilted slightly, her eyes calm and watchful. Eventually, Mallory pushed off the desk and stretched, rolling her shoulders. "Go home, Foster. Get some rest. You've earned it." Bryce shook his head. "I'll wait until the feds are done. Make sure everything's locked down." "Suit yourself." Mallory gave him a tired smile. "Merry Christmas, by the way." "Merry Christmas." She walked away, her boots echoing down the hallway, and Bryce was left alone in the lobby with his partner. He looked down at Ember, and she looked back up at him with those dark, intelligent eyes that had seen so much over the years, eyes that had warned him tonight when no one else could. "Good girl," he said softly, reaching down to scratch behind her ears. "You did good tonight, Em. Real good." Ember's tail thumped against the floor, and she leaned into his hand with a contented sigh. By the time the sun began to rise on Christmas morning, the federal agents had finished their initial sweep and departed with the woman in custody. The station was quiet again, just a skeleton crew on duty. The snow finally beginning to taper off outside, the first pale light of dawn bleeding through the clouds. Bryce sat in the break room with a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hand, Ember curled up on the floor beside him. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving him tired and sore and oddly peaceful. They'd done what they set out to do. They'd kept Ivy safe. They'd stopped the woman from taking her. And now a little girl was going home with her mother, and that was enough. His phone buzzed. A text from Agent Reyes. "Task force mobilized. 3 more locations identified. 12 kids recovered so far. More to come. Your K9's instincts started all of this. We won't forget that. Bryce read the message twice, then set the phone down. 12 kids, 12 families getting the same reunion he'd witnessed tonight. 12 lives pulled back from the edge because Ember had sensed something wrong and refused to let it go. He looked down at his partner, and she looked back at him with that same steady, unwavering gaze. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We did good tonight." Ember's tail thumped once against the tile floor. And outside, the first light of Christmas morning broke through the storm,